I've been thinking a lot about television lately, and I need to share these thoughts. Anyway, I've been thinking about television shows specifically based off premise, and I decided that I want to take time out of my day and rank a bunch of them because I enjoy making these tier list videos. I have the time of my life with them. So that's what we're doing. I'm going to rank a bunch of shows that I've seen. I basically just did the last 2 years of television that I watched, and then just also threw some other shows in there. And we're going to rank it, but here's the thing. We're going to rank it based off the premise. I will also say before we continue, I did exclude some things. My logic was I excluded anything that had required reading for it, essentially. So, like, The Penguin, one of the greatest shows I saw in 2024. You kind of need to watch The Batman. The Penguin, you honestly could watch without The Batman, but, like, it's better if you've seen it. Same thing with, like, Dune Prophecy. You can easily watch it on its own, but it makes more sense if you've seen the source material. So, like, things that have required reading are not included. That still leaves me with like 30-something shows to discuss, which makes me very excited. Also, before we continue, two things. One, I have seen every show on this tier list, at least like the first couple seasons. However, I'm going solely based off the premise. Like, if I were to try and explain what this show is about to someone who's never seen it, that's my thought process. I will try and be normal. There's like some shows where I'm gonna have to really struggle with it, but like I'll try and be normal and take my own emotions about the show out of the equation, and we'll go from there, which I do think will be interesting because like there are shows I love that have a pretty boring premise that like I've only watched because they're like known to be excellent, and they are excellent. And then there are shows that I can't stand that have a very, very good premise. So like we're going based off the premise, not the show. Second thing, opinions. This is my tier list. I'm making it for my own amusement. You don't have to agree with a single ranking on it, and that's totally fine. Okay, cool. Here's my screen. As you might have noticed, there's only a few shows here. There are like 5 rows. Okay, I have like 32 shows to get through, and I'm so ready. But first we must go over the tiers, okay? The all past tier is shows where like if you just told me the premise, I would honestly not watch it. Like, there are some great shows that are going to go in this tier, and there are shows that just I personally would decline to view. That just means that, like, to me, it doesn't sound interesting. I might still watch it if, like, someone were to tell me, like, hey, I think we should watch this show. Like, if the bestie were like, I want to watch it, I'd be like, okay, fine, we can watch it. But it's like, if it were up to me and me alone, I'd probably pass. Next tier, I can watch the pilot. These are the shows where it's like, I'm a little interested. Like, I'll watch the pilot and we'll go from there. We'll see the vibes of the first episode. Maybe it's a no, maybe it's a yes, okay? Then just a good premise. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's a solid premise. Like, it's a good premise. Then I'm extremely intrigued. These are, like, a great premise. Like, you tell me this and I'm like, I'm fascinated. I will absolutely be viewing. And then, of course, a must-watch premise. This is the shows where, based off the premise, if the show were to take that premise and do what I thought they were going to do with it, it would be a must-watch. Okay, I'm trying to think if there are actually any shows in the must-watch premise that I would put in a must-watch tier as, like, an actual show. I guess we'll see. Maybe. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet, but we will figure it out together. I feel like I should also tell you what I consider the premise to be of the show. So we're starting with Pretty Little Liars. If you were to ask me the premise of Pretty Little Liars, I would basically be like, there are hot women in a small town tormented via text, and also their bestie is dead. And that's a good premise. I do think it is a good premise. It's not like a god tier premise, but it's good. I'm intrigued by it. I'm interested. Next show, Gossip Girl. Yes, I put them together for a reason. I feel like these are the shows where it's like the most what the fuck is going on premise. Gossip Girl. If I were to define the premise of Gossip Girl, it would basically be hot, rich teenagers with basically constantly being exposed on Twitter, but instead it's a website, and they're all rich. I'd watch the pilot. I honestly couldn't guarantee I'd watch the rest of the show. Now, I'm not going to say I love Gossip Girl. I was about to say I love Gossip Girl. That would be a stretch. I enjoyed the beginning of Gossip Girl. It got really weird. I will say, both of these shows in particular, we one day need to really dissect how many teen dramas were really into like a statutory rape relationship and making it seem okay. We need to dissect that one day. That's not going to be my doing, though. Either way, if you ignore a lot of what goes on in Gossip Girl, it is interesting. But you gotta ignore a lot of it. Next, we have Once Upon a Time. Can I be so honest? I need to give context, actually. I've been watching Haley Whipjack's Once Upon a Time videos nonstop. I think I found them with season 2. It might have even been season 1. I know I remember season 3's video dropping. She just released the season 5 video a little while ago. I watch them constantly. I've seen them like 18 times a piece, and every time I watch it, I learn new things. Like, I notice new lore every time I watch it. But Once Upon a Time, I was just watching it. That's why this is relevant. Once Upon a Time is the show that made me think about this video, because I was like, Once Upon a Time's premise, frankly, is a must-watch premise. Once Upon a Time as a premise is so interesting. Like, what do you mean all the fairy tale characters are related and connected and living in the same universe? And we're going to dissect that. We're going to give you drama. We're going to give you mess. That's interesting. That's interesting. Take out the savior shit. Honestly, God tier. But even with it, like, the premise behind it is so good. And it's such an interesting thing that went off the rails so quickly. Next we have Squid Game. My premise of Squid Game is kind of just people compete in a game for a lot of money and we have commentary on like class and society. I watched the pilot because the problem is I need to know what that commentary is before I get fully invested. Now, Squid Game is an excellent show. I haven't seen season 2 yet. I don't know what goes on in season 2. But season 1, excellence. Phenomenal. The thing is, as a premise, I'd watch the pilot and I'd need to go from there. Like, I would not be willing to commit to watching an entire season of television based solely off the premise of Squid Game. Now, I've seen Squid Game. Everyone has said how amazing Squid Game is, and I am one of those people. I think Squid Game is amazing. Off the premise, I'd probably just watch the pilot. Next, we have The Crown, and can I be so honest about The Crown? I would pass on The Crown based off its premise. The premise of The Crown is essentially just the life and times of Elizabeth II, and I don't need that. I don't. Like, I could just read her Wikipedia page, and I would probably glean about as much lore as I did in the 6 seasons of television of The Crown. Now, The Crown is another great show, but again, like, based off the premise, like, I don't need that. I know they're thinking about doing more of them. I saw the creator say that. Here's what I want for The Crown. Are you ready? I've had visions for The Crown. I want, like, a Crown cinematic universe, which I know is just the real world. Here are the shows, the monarchs, I would say, that I want. I know they're talking about doing one from Victoria to Elizabeth. I don't want that. I don't need that. I have 2 monarchs in particular I would like the Crown style series for. Actually, 3. I came up with 3. I thought of a new one. First is the original Elizabeth. Like, Elizabeth the First, the Virgin Queen, that Elizabeth. That would be fascinating. Incredible. I want it badly. I would also like her father, Henry VIII. That too, very interesting. If you don't want to give me like 6 seasons about both of them, I will accept like a couple seasons apiece and we give Mary a season. I think that could be fun. The other person I want is Victoria. Like Queen Victoria. Give me a The Crown style show about her. These are my wishes for The Crown. Thank you for listening to me ramble. The way I was gonna recite the intro to Avatar The Last Airbender as the premise, because it is the premise. It's a good premise. I wouldn't say I'm extremely intrigued. I think the one thing holding me back, if you were like to tell me this premise, is the fact that it is a kid's show. Now again, Avatar The Last Airbender, to me, one of the greatest shows of all time. A god tier show. But like, as a premise, it's good. It's interesting. But I feel like if you were to tell it to me now, as a 25-year-old, I would struggle to see myself getting emotionally invested in a 12-year-old. Next, we have Madam Secretary. Have I mentioned my desire to make like an 8-part video on Madam Secretary? I could do it emotionally. I love that show. I'd watch the pilot based off the premise, though. Premise-wise, Madam Secretary is literally just woman becomes Secretary of State. That is kind of the premise. Her predecessor was killed, which does add like a little bit of intrigue to it, but like as a premise, I remember when they would advertise the show, because I watched it way after it came out. I think as I watched it, I think season 7 might have been airing, and that's a maybe. But like, as a premise, I remember when the show came out and it was airing like teasers for it, and I was like, this looks boring. I'm not going to watch it. I loved it. I would recommend it. But as a premise, I'd probably just watch the pilot. I need something to put in the second to top tier. I think The Good Wife has a really intriguing premise. I do, actually. The Good Wife premise, again, to me, is just woman's husband gets caught having an affair and, like, goes to prison, and she has to rebuild her life. Like, that's an interesting premise. And she does so by going to the law firm for, like, her ex-boyfriend. Like, it's an interesting premise. It's a great show. And I'd be intrigued. Like, I was extremely intrigued. I watched The Good Wife as it aired. Like, in real time, I would watch the new episodes. And I loved it. I loved it so bad. Maybe I should rewatch The Good Wife, actually. Now I'm thinking about this. We'll see. We'll see. But until then, it's just, their premise, excellent. I think Interview with the Vampire does have a good premise. That's where I'm going to put it. It's just like, it's an interview with a vampire. Like, that's interesting. That's intriguing. I'm intrigued. It's not like I'm extremely intrigued. If I didn't know there was yaoi in it and the bestie didn't want to watch it, I cannot guarantee I would have seen it. But it is like it's an interesting premise. Next we have The Morning Show. And instead of being a show that I have a lot of feelings about, I would actually pass based off premise. If you were to ask me to describe the premise of The Morning Show, it's that woman is hosting morning show. Her co-anchor gets accused of sexual assault, and then a new woman joins her. And while it is an excellent show, and I did enjoy it a lot, the premise is not great. Like, to me, the only thing that would have gotten me to watch the show when it aired is probably Reese Witherspoon. And now modern day Jennifer Aniston. I've become a Jennifer Aniston stan having watched The Morning Show. But at the time, I wasn't a stan. But, like, as a premise, I'm just like, I'm good. Next, we have a show that I need to be normal about. Okay, The West Wing is my favorite show of all time. They just took it off HBO Max. And I'm debating Crimes. Really and truly. We'll see what I do. Until then, though, the premise. The West Wing is literally just we follow the president and his staff through life, and it is a good premise. That is an interesting premise. It's not an extremely interesting premise, but it is an interesting premise. We need to fill out the top more. The Sopranos, extremely intriguing premise. The Sopranos is one of the greatest shows of all time. I will die on that hill. But as its premise, like, mob boss goes to therapy? That's so interesting. What do you mean a mob boss goes to therapy? And we just watch that relationship evolve while also watching his hot wife and his complicated son who I hate and his hot daughter. Like, it's a good premise. Like, it's such an interesting premise. And they did it in ways that I wouldn't expect. Here's the one thing that I would want from The Sopranos based off its premise and premise alone, is I would just want us to, like, really talk more about psychology. That's my one thing. That's what I feel like was missing from my Sopranos experience. I want us to talk more about psychology. Talk about being a sociopath. Talk about, like, I think, honestly, I understand why they did it, because it is important to Melvi's character, but I honestly think the show would have been better if she let him talk about his crimes. I think it would have made their therapy sessions so much more fascinating. Anyway, The Newsroom, I would honestly pass on The Newsroom. To me, The Newsroom's premise is just a newsroom. Like, we watch, like, a very known anchor of a news show, like, think Anderson Cooper or something, as his ex runs his show. I'm bored. Like, I'm sorry. Like, don't get me wrong, The Newsroom is a great show, but as a premise, like, it's boring. Oh, Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass is a must-watch premise. What do you mean Midnight Mass is about this tiny, extremely Catholic island whose priest has brought back a literal demon to use its blood to heal the sick and elderly? Like, what do you mean that a demon has taken over the church of this tiny, very Catholic island? That's fascinating. That's everything. I would watch 18 seasons of that. You know what show I talked about in my latest video where I talked about the TV shows I watched? But in that video where I talked about that, I said that The Veil had a great premise. What do you mean it's about an MI6 agent and a suspected terrorist going on a road trip together? That's such an interesting premise. That's such a good premise. I don't like how they did it. I don't like how it ended, but I love the premise. You know what show I wouldn't watch based off the premise? Is actually The White Lotus. I've seen both seasons of The White Lotus. Season 1, quite good. Season 2 sucked. My point is, The White Lotus, to me, the premise of The White Lotus is kind of just rich people fuck around at hotel. I've been to rich people fuck around at hotels in real life. Like, I've seen it. So I don't need to watch a show about it. Now again, love is a strong word. I greatly enjoyed season 1 of The White Lotus. But like, it's not the greatest premise. You know what's a better rich people fuck around premise? Succession. Succession actually has a really good premise, which is basically just rich people fuck around for control of their multi-billion dollar empire. See, you tell me the multi-billion dollar empire part, and now I'm intrigued. It didn't hurt that I knew it was based off the family who'd made Fox News, but like, premise-wise, like, that's interesting. I'm intrigued now. You tell me it's about the multi-billion dollar empire, and suddenly I'm invested. Don't tell me they're fucking around at a hotel on vacation. I don't care. Tell me about their multi-billion dollar empire. Okay, Homeland. I've been putting this one off. I won't even deny it. The thing with Homeland is, the first 3 seasons are their own show. And then I've only seen through season 4. Season 4 is a totally different show. Okay? The only thing that connects it is the characters. Fully different show. That said, Homeland, based off the premise, is actually a good premise. It's about a CIA agent who thinks that a return from home soldier is a terrorist. And then she ends up fucking him. Like, that's interesting. I'm intrigued by that. I'm not extremely intrigued, but I am intrigued by that. And that does give me enough to, like, watch at least a season. Let's talk about Elementary next. For the unaware, actually, Elementary is one of my favorite shows ever. I love it so bad. I would watch solely the pilot based off the premise. It's just Sherlock Holmes in the modern day, and also in New York and Watson's a girl. That's the premise. Now, they took it, and they fucking ran with it. And they ran to the gates of heaven. I love Elementary. But, like, if it weren't for Lucy Liu, I probably wouldn't have ever started watching it. You know what I want to talk about next? Let's talk about Star Wars. Let's talk about The Acolyte. I think... Where would I put The Acolyte based on the premise? It's just like... I don't even know how to describe the premise of The Acolyte. It's basically just girl and twin do weird shit. That's not even close to what it is. It's about, like, this girl who wasn't a Jedi and left, and her lore. And it's a good premise. I think... I'm so mad about The Acolyte in particular because it got canceled when it got interesting. I think that, like, if they put me in charge, I would have made a God tier show. I would have made an amazing show. I would have taken out the twin shit. I would have made it more psychological. And I would have given it more than one season. And also, I would have kept Mr. Manny in there with his shirt off a bit more. I would have run the shit out of that show, and I know it. And it is a good premise. It was just handled so poorly. You know what else is a good premise that was handled really poorly, actually? Designated Survivor. That's such an interesting premise. The government decimated. Everyone's dead. And we have to rebuild. That's such an interesting premise. That show was not very good. I did watch all 3 seasons, and it got really bad really fast. Like, dare I say, before season 2. It was not a well-handled show. Premise-wise, though, that shit is fascinating. I feel like House of Cards is the natural next show to talk about with Designated Survivor, and I don't actually know where I would put it. I need to ponder for a moment. I think I would put it... Yeah, I think I'd put it there with I'm extremely intrigued. The premise of, like, we watch the House Majority Whip as he manipulates his way into more and more power with his hot wife, that's interesting. I'm intrigued by that. I'm so intrigued by that, actually, dare I say. Also, can I be honest? I need to have a confession for a moment. House of Cards did, in fact, get me through the latter years of the first Trump presidency. And there's like a 50-50 chance I'm going to watch this show like 5 times in the next 4 years. Let's talk about Shogun. Shogun, to me, would be I would watch the pilot based off the premise. I did watch the pilot based off the premise, and then I loved it and I watched the whole thing. But I feel like Shogun is just kind of... It's very similar to The Crown, only it's lore I don't actually know. Like, the thing with The Crown is, like, I'm relatively aware of a lot of English history, because I'm a loser for history. I'm less aware of Japanese history. So, like, to me, that's just more intriguing of a premise. Speaking of British history, Downton Abbey is honestly just, like, a little bit better than The White Lotus. Because, again, The White Lotus is just people fuck around at hotel. Downton Abbey is just rich people fucking around in the early 19th century. Like, that's kind of it for what Downton Abbey is. Now, again, I would have watched it entirely for Maggie Smith. And I did watch, like, a lot of it for Maggie Smith. That is my girl. May she rest in peace, my angel, my literal fallen queen. But, Downton Abbey, I think It's not the strongest premise. Now, again, people fucking loved that show. My mom still watches it, like, on loop. If you were wondering where I get my insanity about shows from, I do get it from her. She has seen Downton Abbey probably 8 or 10 times at this point. She just, like, once every few months goes through a phase where she watches the whole show. And people love it. I just don't think it's the best premise. Next, let's talk Fallout. Now, Fallout does technically have the pre-existing lore of the Fallout games, and you could consider that required reading. The problem is I didn't play them, so, like, I didn't have the required reading. But it's a good premise. Like, the concept being that we've had a nuclear apocalypse, like, I don't know, a century earlier, and then we have to deal with the aftermath of that. That's interesting. I'm intrigued by that. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up in, like, that era where we had, like, 18 different movies about nuclear apocalypses in the aftermath. I don't know. It's an interesting premise. Oh, another show that did technically have required lore is Boston Legal. For the unaware, Boston Legal is a spin-off of The Practice. And just like with Fallout, I've never actually seen The Practice. I've seen Boston Legal, like, 5 times. Premise alone, I think I would honestly just watch the pilot. Maybe not even. Because it's about lawyers fucking around in Boston. That's all the show is actually, like, premise-wise about. And don't get me wrong. Greatest show. Like, top 5 favorite shows of mine. But it's not a great premise. There's, like, a lot of shows that I deeply adore that are in the bottom half of this tier list. I don't like that. We need a show that I loved and is interesting as a premise. How to Get Away with Murder. What do you mean? You're telling me this show is about a group of law school students whose teacher makes them her employees and also kills people. And people die constantly. People die all the time, and she, like, has nothing that she wouldn't do to get her clients off. That's interesting. That's so interesting. That's such a cool and interesting premise. Also, Viola Davis. Viola Davis honestly would be enough of a draw for me to watch this show if I didn't also enjoy the premise. You know what else I put, like, near the top? Dare I say, actually, yeah, I'm going to put it. Baby Reindeer. Actually, no, I lied. I'm putting it down 1 tier. I am extremely intrigued by the premise. I don't think it's a god tier premise. But, like, it's about this man and his stalker, and that's so interesting to me. That's so fascinating. That's such a cool concept with the way it was done. I think a big part of it is the fact that, like, it is him. Like, him, real life, his real life stalker. It's his story. I think that does add a lot. But, like, it's still an interesting premise. Okay, I feel like I've healed. We can do a show that I loved and doesn't have an interesting premise. I would not have watched Abbott Elementary based off the premise. In fact, I didn't for years. I only watched it this year, like recently this year, because one of my best friends has been telling me to watch it for a year, and I finally had an opportunity, and it was great. And I loved it. But you're going to tell me that this show is just about people at teachers at a public Philly school and their misadventures? I would not watch that. I'm so sorry. I love the show. I would not watch that. Okay, friends. It's time. Let's talk about Breaking Bad. I think Breaking Bad has a good premise. I think that it's like you would tell it to me and I would laugh in your face. Just a little bit, but I would also watch it. In the sense that it's about a high school chemistry teacher whose wife kind of hates him, who gets cancer, and then starts selling meth to pay for cancer treatments. I think I would think you're making it up. Like, I'm fully aware, and I feel like those of us who are, like, honest with ourselves are aware. Breaking Bad is an insane premise. And not in, like, a fun, messy boots kind of way. Not in, like, a Once Upon a Time way. In, like, a what do you mean this is a thing? That's insane. That's insanity. But also, I would watch it. Like, I would be intrigued. I don't think I'd be extremely intrigued. Mainly because I feel like the better parts of Breaking Bad... Like, can I be honest? Can we be honest about Breaking Bad? I've seen all of it. I think it gets stronger later. I don't think the first, like, 2 seasons are on par with, like, the last 4 or whatever. And I think if you just told me the premise, I'd be like, sure. Honestly, I just think it got better when the cancer was no longer a factor. Moving right along. Handmaid's Tale. I am extremely intrigued by the premise. I think part of it is just general American society in the modern day. That's just me. I know. But it is, like, an interesting premise. Like, in a weird dystopian future where birth rates have plummeted and, like, most women literally just can't carry a child to term, that's interesting. and then you throw in like Handmaids and all that. Like, it's interesting. I'm intrigued. I'm extremely intrigued. Okay, Lost. I think Lost is actually a must-watch premise. I do. A plane crashes on a mysterious, freaky island where magical shit and there's a demonic smoke monster is roaming around. That's fascinating. That's so interesting to me. I will, honestly, I don't think I would have even been allowed to watch Lost when it aired. It aired when I was like 6. But like, if hypothetically it aired like a decade later, and I was like 16, I would have watched the shit out of that show. I would have been so intrigued. I would have done the freaky ARG. I would have been so here for Lost based off the premise. Because, like, that's such an interesting premise. That's a fascinating premise. Okay, I've actually intentionally been saving The Idol for last. The Idol, dare I say, is probably the worst show I've ever seen. At least of shows that had, like, insane budgets. Worst show I've ever seen. I did just see Nosferatu, and the bestie who watched episode 1 of The Idol with me and nothing else was like, since when can Lily Rose Depp act? And I was like, see, it wasn't her, it was the material. Like, I knew she was good in The Idol. But, like, and the same thing with, like, Divine. Like, there were good actors in The Idol. It was just the worst show ever. However, the premise is actually really good. Like, it's about this pop star trying to make her grand comeback, and she gets seduced by a cult leader. Take out the freaky sex shit, that's such an interesting concept. If it weren't for the freaky sex shit, I might even put it in a must-watch concept, because that's interesting. Did they handle any of it well? No. Literally nothing about the show is good. If there were a show that I would need stricken off the face of the earth, it would actually be The Idol. It is probably the worst show I've ever seen in my entire life. But, like, premise-wise, it's fascinating. Anyway, that's all I got for you at the moment. I will concede, I feel like this video went a little off the rails with me personally. Like, I think I just went a little too crazy. But, like, I had fun. I had fun doing it. I have no regrets. I've had a great time sitting here for around 30 minutes. So, like, great use of my time for me personally. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to comment your thoughts down below. Let me know how you feel about my various rankings. Again, based off premise and premise alone. Other things, like and subscribe if you want to or don't. I'll be okay either way. In the description, I'm going to put a few things. I'm going to put 3 videos that I've decided on. I will put my 2023 TV show ranking, my 2024 TV show ranking. Both of them are just, I rank the various shows I watched. A lot of the 2023 shows did not make it in this video for a variety of reasons, but most of the 2024 ones did. And I watched a lot of television in 2024, so you can watch that if you so choose. I will also put, I made a video where I basically ranked characters who've won Emmys for their performance. That will also be in the description. You may watch that if you so choose. And yeah, thank you again for watching. Bye!